Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. It's been a while since we got to kind of hang out. I've been on the Rockstar Rescue Tour, and I can't even begin to tell you how wonderful it was. But I haven't got a chance to really chat with you all like this. So we're going to go over the same reminders that we've gone over every single week. Thank you, Lori. Welcome back to you too. So you can like the Leather Elves on Facebook to get notifications. You can check our Facebook page to catch surprise sales, pop up events, things like that. Follow the Leather Elves on Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So it's good to be back. It really is. And I have a great guest tonight. We're going to be talking about some really cool avicultural things. And I think what the topic that we're talking about is going to be appropriate for both, people who are actively breeding, people who are, in rescue, people who are companion parrot owners. So it is my pleasure, hey, Ray, to introduce to you guys John Del Rio. Hey, John, how are
Hello
you?
there. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited that you're here. So I'm going to read your bio because it's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
But I have to read it because I couldn't memorize it because I'm old and I forget things. But um, so John began his life in exotic aviculture at age 13. So what, just, like 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's about.
He started with budgies, cockatiels, and golden pheasants, and he quickly started building a large collection of conures, amazons, cockatoos, macaws, as well as many species of pheasants, softbills, cranes, corvids, ratites, and working with rehabbed raptors. So you had a little bit of everything. Um,
hmm
John's privilege has been all the legendary aviculturists that he was able to learn from and spend time with. And in the 90s, John created a bird and reptile supply and accessories company that he eventually grew to a point where the operations were moved to Chihuahua, Mexico. Many of the purchased toys and other animal accessories are still in pet stores and pet chains today, and they were originally designed and manufactured by John. John also created a wrought iron cage company called Island Cage Company that manufactured high end powder coated cages, parrot cages. In his 40 years of being heavily involved in aviculture, his goals now are to build up self sustaining populations of his favorite bird species as a legacy for his children and the future of aviculture. John resides with his wife and two children in southwestern Idaho. So, are there a lot of aviculturists in Idaho?
um, I don't know very many that are into on the parrot side of things, on the citizen side.
Hmm.
But there are quite a few in the poultry and game birds and pheasant. There's quite a few of them. We created a bird club several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. For Idaho, and it ran the gamut of everyone from people that just have chickens, all the way to people that have exotic birds as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but I don't know
interesting.
a lot. There's a handful. There's a handful of people on the parrot side of things. Um, Game birds was a pretty big thing here. In fact, my neighbor just the next ranch over, directly behind me, um, Mr. John Redman, wonderful man, a good friend of James Farr, in fact, and he had a huge game bird farm there, which encompassed all the exotic pheasants, all the ornamental pheasants. Um, Fantastic facility, and unfortunately, he's at a point now in his life where he's too old to have those birds anymore. So over the last 2 years or so, he's liquidated. But that was quite a place there. They even had the I forget which organization it was, the American Pheasant Waterfowl Society, or one of the big game bird pheasant groups had their convention here at his place several
Wow.
years ago. Yeah, so it
It's,
was quite an impressive place.
and I think sometimes we get stuck when we talk about aviculture, we get stuck in companion parrots. And I think,
hmm
definitely that's a huge chunk of it. But you and I were talking before we went um, on the trip, we got to go to the Avian Research Institute and Conservation Center with James Farr and Stan. And it was
Yeah.
just eye-opening, there's so much more out there, and it's also cool.
Oh, yeah.
So, John, if you had to define what an aviculturist is, how would you define that?
Yeah, and excellent question. I think, John Delacour's definition of aviculture, I think, is pretty well precise and right on. Um, I see it as a true aviculturist. I think you have to be producing birds, or actually have the intent to produce birds. That doesn't mean you're not involved with aviculture if you aren't breeding birds. A rescue or a sanctuary, or just someone that's just enjoying birds. I I would kind of probably put a dividing line between someone who just keeps parrots in their home, let's say, is inside their home as pets, which is perfectly good, perfectly fine. Um, that would be aviculture adjacent, but
Right.
but really aviculture should be the continuation of those species, that bird, whatever it is. Um, that thing that's just on the screen right there, our world of birds. I wrote that probably, I don't know, probably going back 12 years now or something like that. I wrote that paragraph. Um, those are my photos as well, which I'm pretty proud of. I'm not a professional photographer by any means, but I got some good ones there, mostly because I had good access to cool birds. Um, but if I, this to me is the definition of what aviculture means to me, what brings me joy, and I think it resonates with a lot of other people. Um,
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. And I think too, when I talk to companion parrot owners and when I talk to folks who are running rescues and sanctuaries, um, as far as I want them to feel as empowered as people who consider themselves aviculturists,
mhm,
because there is so much to keeping birds, and
yeah.
there are different aspects of it. And like when we went on the Rockstar tour, we saw there each one was different. Every facility that we visited, whether it was James's place or a rescue or a sanctuary, like Sess has a sanctuary in South Carolina, and it was a matter. Everything was each one of them had something different to offer, and I think it's really about how you view yourself in how you. I think that translates into good bird care. Just my opinion,
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you've had the opportunity to work with a wide spectrum of birds. Do you have a favorite species?
Well, my favorite bird species is a harpy eagle, and that's
You haven't
my
worked it
dream bird
though.
that I will have one someday, or more than likely a pair. One day I will. That's been my goal for a long, long time. So that would be my favorite species of bird. My favorite species of citizen parrot is a thick-billed parrot. I've had those in the past, and I absolutely love them. I love everything about them. I've been to the location one of the locations where they live in Mexico in the Sierra Madre Mountains there. Um, I didn't get to see them when I was there, but that's where they migrate into that area every year. They're just a very special bird to me. Um, so that would be my favorite parrot species. But overall, yeah, harpy eagle is my thing.
What about that you've worked with? Beside not
uh,
citizen non-citizen.
yeah, I would have to say of the birds I have now, probably the black-throated magpie jays that I have. They're a species of
Right.
corvid. Um,
Yeah.
they look kind of like, similar to the magpies we have in North America. They come from northwestern Mexico area, the mountains there. Um, very long tail, crest, beautiful birds, super intelligent,
Mhm.
very wary, uh, not easy to breed. Um, Yeah, they're fantastic. And that kind of brings me to the other thing is, in general, that not applying to harpy eagle, but in general, I'm most attracted to species of birds that have a ridiculously long tail compared to the size of their body. That's just my natural
Hmm.
inclination. So macaws, golden pheasant, Amherst pheasant, great
Yeah.
Argus, peafowl, um, paradise white, you name it, whatever species of bird it is, if it's got a very long tail compared to its rest of its body, I'm just naturally attracted to it.
There you go. Um, we Carrie just put on the chat that she wants you to pick her up a pair of shoe bills. So,
Yeah, we'll get
when
right
that
on that.
comes
Yeah, no problem.
on. But yeah, I mean, and I think it's so interesting that that passion. You can see it when you talk about different birds. And it's really about how do we keep them safe? How do we keep them in the best possible environments that we can? Because I mean, okay, so captivity may not be, or inhuman care. I'm sorry, that's the new politically correct term.
Yeah.
Um, it's not it may not be ideal, but how do we get close? How do we do that? I mean, and I think that's something that you do in your facility. Am
We
I
try, and I believe in that philosophy in just in life in general, which is constant improvement. Whatever we're doing, whatever avocation or vocation we have, it should be constant improvement, even if it's the tiniest little things. But as long as you're moving in a positive direction, what more can we ask? Um,
right?
so going back to what you mentioned, my entrance into birds, especially exotic birds, when I was 13 years old. Um, that was a by chance thing. I've told the story many times that I had pigeons and chickens and things like that I was keeping myself when I was a young kid. My dad had all kinds of animals, so we had lots of things to to play with. Um, but I didn't really know that exotic birds could be owned. I didn't know that those even you see them at the zoo, but I never knew that you could actually have one until one day there was a 4-H poultry show at the Mount Shasta Mall in Redding, California. Okay, the mall there, and imagine having a poultry show inside the mall, like in the main corridors of the mall. So they have all the show cages set up. They had rabbits there too, and all kinds of other stuff. And so I heard about that on the radio that this show was coming up. I begged my dad, please, can you take me to I want to go to this. This is like 30 miles away. So we go, and I see all the different species of or not species, excuse me, breeds of pigeons and chickens and all the stuff that I love, right? And we get down to one end of the mall there, and there's a rotunda, and there's a big giant aviary set up with turacos, Indian different mutations of Indian ringnecks, wood ducks, mandarin ducks, Lady Amherst pheasant, golden pheasants, all sorts of the most beautiful birds you could ever imagine in this aviary, kind of planted, Um, and so I'm just standing there like an idiot. Just I can't believe what I'm seeing here. And there's people standing in front of it that are operating this thing, and they're handing out flyers. And it's a flyer with their address and everything else, and a price list on it. So you look at okay, there's a golden pheasant. Oh, you can have that for $50 or whatever it was, right? And then at the bottom of the page, it said free tours of the bird farm on Saturdays. Well, guess where we were the next Saturday, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So that was Laura's Bird Farm in Happy Valley, California. We went there the next Saturday. I bought a bird that day. They gave us the grand tour of everything. It was one of the largest bird farms in the country at the time, with
Mhm.
a wide spectrum of species, from finches to ostrich and everything in between. We hit it off. They were very kind to me as a punk 13-year-old kid. And that started the whole chain of events where I was there. They became some of my very best friends to this day. And they mentored me and taught me everything about aviculture. And that was my entrance. So I got that wide spectrum entrance right from the beginning. And I'm so
Yeah,
glad it
and
happened that way.
I think too that's you bring up a really good point, John, that, you know, as a child, you were, um, taken under their wing, so to speak,
Mhm.
pun intended, but that somebody in aviculture brought you along, taught you about this. So Michelle says, anyone else curious? What did you bring home that day?
I bought a little blue budgie, which I think in one of the pictures that Nick had shown earlier, the one with the budgies right up against my face, that was him. His name was Squirt. And that was the first one I bought. And I bought another one, a female, the following week, and that was it.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I
there he
mean,
is, right
there
there.
you go.
Yeah.
But I think, it brings up the point that we as people who love birds, people who work with birds, people who keep birds, need to kind of keep that going and really get the younger generation in, um, you know, involved and get them
Mm,
share some of that passion that we have for
yep,
birds. But so,
absolutely.
all right, so let's get to the heart of this, our chat tonight. Challenges in weather.
Hmm.
What are we talking about? What are some of the challenges as aviculturists and as companion parrot owners, as people who have outdoor aviaries? What are some of the challenges we're looking at?
Sure. So let me go back to the bird farm I just mentioned that I grew up learning all this stuff. Um, that was in Happy Valley. That's in the northern valley of Northern California, northern Sacramento Valley, where it gets extremely hot in the summertime. We're talking, I mean, just a few weeks ago, it was 121 degrees there. Okay. It's very hot. It's a pocket of where all the heat from the valley of California moves up there and just gets stuck in the mountains and it just bakes there. So, summertime, you know, June, July, August, and into September, it's over 100 degrees almost every single day. Very hot. And then in the wintertime, although they don't get a ton of snow, you can get snow at that same location. I remember going to
Mhm.
Laura's Bird Farm in an emergency situation because overnight they got like a foot of snow or whatever it was, and all the roofs on the aviaries were crumbling, or falling down and stuff, crashing. So we had to go over there and get all the snow off of everything. Um, so, in one location you could have 120 degrees, and you could have weather in the teens in that spot there, where it gets down into the teens at night, and then snow and ice and everything else. Um, and yet they had all of their birds of all kinds of species outdoors year round. No heat, no anything. Yeah. They had species that, let's say, just in the pheasant world, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I can't have that particular species of pheasant, whatever it is, a tragopan or an impian or a whatever. Um, I can't have that because it's too hot where I live." Well, we proved that wrong at Laura's Bird Farm because they had all of them and they did just fine. You know, yeah, there's challenges within the species, and that's where the husbandry comes in. That's where you need to know about that species particularly, so you can make small adjustments between them. Golden pheasant, they can handle any weather there is. Maybe an impian needs a little more shade, maybe a little more moisture around it. Put some sprinklers or some misters up or whatever else. So that's where the fine tuning comes in, and that's what makes a good aviculturist or a medium aviculturist or one that's not going to probably succeed very well, is how you make those small adjustments and and sticking to or committing to constantly making adjustments, not just sticking with
Mhm.
one thing and it
So
didn't work. Well, that's the end of it.
in this slide, so the slides that Nick will be putting up, they're from your, just so people know, they're from a presentation that you did at AFA.
Last
So
year, yeah, last
the
year in
second
Dallas.
question here: how do you research? So this is a big one for me.
Hmm.
How do people know that it's a valid source? I mean, there's so much garbage out there right now.
Right.
How do people
Yeah.
know?
That is a challenge for sure. That's the tough one. Because anyone can put up a website these days, and all of a sudden they think they're an expert, and everyone else thinks they're an expert, and they may not be. Um, as I was coming up, I had my mentors who had been doing it, and no one taught them either how to do this stuff. They learned it by trial and error for most part, and making those constant small changes to things as they moved along. But they also had other people that were very experienced, that they could make a phone call to, because back then it was just a regular phone hanging on the wall. But so I would always research with people first. The
Mhm.
ones that are doing it already, that have made the mistakes, that are more than likely happy to tell you how not to make the same mistakes they did. That's the number one source. Because I remember back, when I was a teenager there, um, for instance, with parrots, there was very few parrot books that were worth anything as far as good information. There was the Parrots of the World, which was just an identification, and had good information, of course, but um, they're not going to tell you how to build an aviary for a parrot in the Parrots of the World. You had to figure that out somehow. Um, so yeah, going to researching it with other aviculturists who are doing it already and have had success or failures. That's probably the
Mhm.
best place to start. And then, you can gain a lot of knowledge off the internet, factual stuff that you can verify. Um,
Mhm.
but as far as the fine details go, that's either going to be you figuring it out on your own or talking to someone who's already done it
Yeah,
and
I
being
think,
humble enough to
and
take their
talking.
advice. Humility, not knowing that you don't know anything.
It's huge, and I think it's important for people, don't be afraid to ask questions. If this is something that you wanna do, or you wanna start doing, and it's never too late to start either, but
Mm-hmm.
talking to people who have done it, someone like Lorella, if anybody asks me questions about, like, Eclectus diet, I
Right.
I don't even discuss it. I go, "Oh, you need to talk to Lorella and Lisa."
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's really about using that networking and going to the conferences. I mean, AFA is coming up, ASA, um, you know, that's where years and years ago, it was, I don't know if you experienced this, John, but it was a little bit, people kept their information close to the vest. It was,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I'm doing this, so I'm not gonna share my success with you." But I
Right.
really think today, the people who are have the knowledge to be mentors are more willing to share. I mean, do you find that?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I think Dave Ramsey uses the terminology, the heart of a teacher, right? So if you have the heart
Mhm.
of a teacher, then you're gonna share your information as best you know with others, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I'll tell you one of the things that I learned a lot from when I was very young and even older. Um, all the different bird magazines. So the AFA Watchbird,
Mhm.
right? ASA Bulletin, the oh goodness, the AC American Cage Bird Magazine, American Pheasant Waterfowl Society magazine. There was 5 or 6 or 7 of them that I used to get when I was a teenager. And
Mhm.
yeah, of course, I read every article front. I memorized those things. I read them 20 times. But I'll tell you where I learned a lot of information. Oh, Bird Talk magazine even was great. Dick Schroeder used to write an article every month or every issue, and lots of other people did. But where I learned a lot of the little tiny details that you wouldn't get in the article necessarily was in the classifieds, because people would say the things in their ad that they're doing to try and separate themselves from everyone else. We're, hand fed from day one or whatever that terminology came, it was around at that time. I don't know. There's a lot more to that, but there was a lot of details that you could figure out. Well, this guy says this, and this guy says this, and it kind of matches. That sounds like a good idea, whatever. Whether it was diet or how they're housed or how they were hand fed or whatever. There was a lot to learn from how people advertise what they're trying to sell.
Yeah. No, it definitely makes sense. So you brought diet, we're talking about extreme heat, extreme cold.
Yeah,
Does diet play into keeping
definitely.
birds in either situation? Okay.
Yeah. So particularly in the cold weather, diet is more important. Um, when the birds have to be creating their own heat and managing themselves, they're not getting auxiliary heat from any other heat source. They got to have more fat and more carbohydrates. Protein is really almost useless to them at that point. They need fat and
Mhm.
carbohydrates, and they need it available to them all day. And here in North America, especially where I live in the northern part of the country, In the wintertime, the days are very short, right? We get barely
Mhm.
8 hours of seems like 8 hours of sunlight, if that. Um, so that also puts a stress on the birds because they've got a smaller window of time to eat when in their natural habitat they'd be eating all day long, nibbling here or there and
Mhm.
maintaining their caloric intake. Whereas, in a northern cold weather situation, they've got a limited amount of hours and they're burning a lot more calories to keep their warmth going. Um, so that all has to be taken into account. They
Mhm.
still need water. You know, how many times have I seen my conures or even the macaws? You put fresh water out there that you've just chiseled the ice out of, and the pan or the bowl or whatever, and they're diving in it in ice water because they still
Mhm.
want to drink and they still want to bathe every day, regardless of the temperature. Um, in the summertime, feeding more fresh foods, especially with the citizens, um, kind of gets you're able to get more um, hydration into them if you're feeding them fruit and vegetables and things like that that already are mostly water anyways. It keeps them busy all the day, all through the day, and then keeps them hydrated.
So, as far as diet's concerned for citizens in particular,
Yeah, yeah,
um, is this so more fruit and veggies in addition to a pellet, in addition to seed? What are we looking at? More seed in the wintertime? So what are we talking about?
yeah. Sure. Look at that picture right there with the Patagonians there. So that's a seed mix that I still use to this day, and I make it myself, by the way. So I'm not paying the $100 a bag that some people pay for parent seed. I go to Tractor Supply or your local farm supply, and I grab all that stuff and I mix it myself in a galvanized uh, trash can, and I can
Mhm.
do you know 150 pounds, 200 pounds for one third the price that most people buy already mixed seeds. So that's a good thing to do. But yes, so seed, high fat seeds, black oil sunflower. That's almost pure fat, right?
Mhm.
Safflower is good, and then for the carbohydrates, whole wheat berries, um, corn, of course. All those do really well to give the birds the carbs that they need to get their motor running so they can burn the fat and do okay,
So I know that I guarantee you I have companion parrot owners out here and, some rescue folks, and I know I do because we've got majestic wings on here, um, who are going over that diet. I know they are.
Yeah.
And with good reason, because we're talking about birds that are outside
Yes.
predominantly, right? And
Yeah.
we're talking about birds that are in cooler climates,
Yeah, in the
and we're
wintertime.
talking
Yep.
about birds that are more active than your average.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, and
okay.
all of those things that you just mentioned are kind of, if you look at it kind of like the old equalizer on a stereo system, like your nice house stereo system. You have the equalizer where you're adjusting all the the bass and treble and mid range and all that stuff. That's where all those little tiny decisions come in. How big is your aviary? Do your birds actually fly in their cages, or are they
Mhm,
just sitting there on the perch all day long? How cold is it getting? How much light do you have during the day? Um, what species it is, because some are more active than others, right? So
mhm,
you wouldn't want to feed a super high fat diet to a species that's largely inactive. Let's say Amazons, for instance, even some cockatoos uh, that aren't going to be flying around. They're usually crawling along the wire. They're not actually using the entire flight, unless you
right,
make it really big and you force them to. Force them to by putting things in opposite ends, so they have to go back and forth.
mhm,
But yeah, so that kind of those are all those small little adjustments. Going back to what you said about a pet owner seeing the diet that I'm feeding, yeah, you that shouldn't be 100% the diet of a pet bird sitting in a cage in your living room because it's gonna
right.
end up overweight. So
Mhm.
those types of settings with a pet bird like that, they need a lot more um, vegetables, some fruit, pellets. They can have some pellets, although I don't agree with a 100% pellet diet or even a majority percentage of pellets. Pellets have their purpose. I like them
Mhm.
because it's a way to get vitamins and nutrients that you want to make sure they're getting. If they're picky about the fresh things you're giving them, and only eat certain things, well, at least you know if they're eating the pellets, they're getting all of it. It's also nice because it's shelf stable, basically, and can be left there for the whole day. They don't just go through it real quick and don't have any food the rest of the day. So
No, and I gotta say, as far as all pellet or all fresh, I think there's a happy medium, and I think, um, I personally am not going to, if, for a pet bird, I'm not going to spend the time that it takes to create well, I shouldn't say I'm not going to take the time. I don't know how to create a completely fresh diet. I
mhm,
don't know how to do that. So I think there's a balance, and so pellets have a place in that as long as it's not predominant,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I think that that's important, for people to think about to be realistic about what are, you know, you able to do as in your setting, whatever that may be, whether you're a breeder or an aviculturist or a companion parrot owner. And I think people need to be realistic about that when they're looking
yeah.
at it. Um, so, yeah, Michelle's got a bear-eyed, and he's a perch potato, and she says he resents her when he has to do his cardio every day for his, measly seed ball treat. Well, that's okay, Michelle, because, you're getting that cardio out of him, so it's good.
Yeah, and that bear-eyed, if
So
in the wild of Australia, that bear-eyed would be probably flying 50 miles a day to get just to survive. So it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a hard thing to do.
And I think I think that's something else, that gets overlooked a lot is what is the activity budget of that bird or that animal if it's in the wild, and then because people are like, oh, I want to feed exactly what they'd be eating in the wild. Well, they're not acting exactly as they would in the wild. They're not expending that amount of calories. So you got to kind of be you've got to look at the big picture and how to, Carrie said at one point, Carrie said, diet goes with environment and lifestyle. And,
Yep.
I think that's very, very true. So we covered the cold. What about in the heat? You're saying more fresh and, for hydration and things like that in the
Yeah,
heat.
as possible and reasonable. I don't like to see a lot of wastage. When you're feeding the birds, I hate to give them all this nice stuff and then it all just goes on the floor or up in the bottom of the cage or whatever. Um, so you got to make some adjustments there. One thing that always worked really well is sprouted seeds. So you get the whole seeds, soak them for a day, put a little tiny, just a ounce of bleach or something in there to kill any bacteria or whatever. It's not that bad. It evaporates quickly. It's much less than what's in your tap water, so don't worry about it.
Mhm.
Um, and within 2-3 days, you've got a nice, fresh, hydrated food source that's expanded quite a bit. So you're getting more money, more for your money there as far as feeding the birds, if you have a lot of birds. Um, sprouts are great. They're a commitment though because you got to do it every single day. So if you're gone for a day or two or whatever, it kind of screws up your program. But if you can get those going, that's another great way to introduce fresh foods that it also takes the bird more time to eat them. So it gives them something to
Right.
do. They're active doing that,
Mhm.
as opposed to just cracking a sunflower and down it goes.
And I think that's, it's good for digestion too when you think about it because it's prolonging that feed time. It's not just, scarf it all down. It's processed and then okay, what do I do the rest of the day? Because when we
Hmm.
look at birds in the wild, they're spending all this time foraging, looking for food, making that search, actively eating. There's a lot that happens that's not happening with a bird in human care. So,
Right. Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
so diet plays a
Now, one thing
lot
I'll,
as
I'll
far as
mention. Well, let me mention. I'm sorry. Mention real quick
no, go
before we
ahead.
get off the feed part is there's a lot of great pellet brands out there, Missouri and all the different brands. Psittacus, and there's very good ones, and a lot of people swear by them. I've used probably all of them, and I use pigeon pellets. They're made for pigeons, either racing, for breeding or maintenance, and depending on the time of the year, you use the different ones. Uh, it's significantly less expensive than your average parrot pellet, and the birds, it's very palatable to the birds. All of them will eat it. Um, and it's also, it just does really well for what I got going. That works really well.
Mhm. So Sarah says, they don't use anything in the Sarah Robinson, they don't use anything in their sprouts, but they definitely are much higher nutrients, and it's more cost effective than feeding plain seed. I absolutely, Sarah, that's,
Yeah.
definitely true. Yeah, she says the pigeon, pea seed mix is great for sprouting. So that's cool.
Yeah. So that's a
Yeah, because I
pigeon
mean,
seed mix that has various little peas and all that kind of stuff. That is a great thing to use for sprouting. Yes.
thank you, Sarah. Okay, so when we were you're in your PowerPoint in your presentation, you talk about creative animal husbandry. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Mostly that has to do with, I love being able to utilize, and this is something that my dad taught me. He's a contractor, and also my mentors, Bob and Laura Himkin. um, Utilizing the things that you have readily available to you instead of making everything a difficult by special building everything. Use the things that we have available to us, which nowadays is even way better than it was back then, right? So we didn't have Home Depot and Lowe's back then. We do now. So it's consistent. Those products that they have there, if you can find something there that you can modify or just use in some way with your aviculture program, you're so much better off because you can repeat it. Um, Things like this that weren't readily available back then, nice for 30 or 40 bucks, whatever it is, you can get these automatic timers that run on batteries that you can set
Mhm.
up for your sprinklers to keep the moisture up when it's really hot, or watering systems for your birds or whatever. All these types of things we have available to us. We're so much It's so much easier nowadays to do these types of things. But I love being able to get stuff from big box stores that is going to be a consistent thing. So pick your materials, whether you're building aviaries or outfitting a cage or coming up with a feed system or a watering system or whatever. Go there and figure it out. You will always have to make adjustments, but at least you can repetitively create that over and over again. If you expand, you get more birds. You just keep doing it that way with small
Yeah.
adjustments. It's great.
Well, and when you're talking about going to Home Depot and making that, you can find it there. Sometimes it just takes walking up and down the aisles and ideas
Mhm.
will hit you. I remember years ago, it was 2011. I was doing a zookeepers conference, and we were doing a workshop on how to do an on-demand shower system. It was for elephants, but it's applicable
Mhm.
across species,
Yep.
across taxa. And it was it was right after September 11th, and it was in Canada, and I couldn't bring PVC pipe, across the border easily, so
Yeah.
we had to go to Home Depot, and we just walked up and down the aisles to find, "Here you go, pre-assembled mist kit." I
Yeah.
it's there. Sometimes it's not necessarily where you think it's gonna be.
Right.
But take some time to just walk around and see. And then there's other stuff that, it may not be sold for birds or for, any kind of animal, but it might work. And from my
Yep.
point of view too, creating enrichment, there's all kinds of stuff at Home Depot and Lowe's that can be used. Um, so what do you mean if you get more birds, it's a given that that's going to happen?
Yeah, yeah, you're
No,
right, Matt. That's exactly what happens. I
um,
posted on Facebook recently that I just built some new pheasant aviaries, and then of course they're already all full, and then a beautiful peacock showed up at our neighbor's house, and they had me come over and get it. So the cages just fill themselves with birds. You just got to build the cages.
It's the field of dreams approach. If you build it, they will
Exactly.
come. So,
Exactly.
um, so let's talk about. We're gonna go and so now everybody's gonna be at Home Depot and Lowe's all weekend buying cool stuff, which is great.
Yeah,
We need to get a kickback, John. I don't know. This needs to happen.
absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
affiliate program.
right? But there's lots of trials, new materials, new products. Um, I love the line here, John. Never lock onto one particular method and think you have it all figured out.
Right, right.
It's
And
so
the one
true.
below that, the quote from Roland, who's also one of my favorite people and mentors, is he's said that line a million times. I want to hear from everyone, including the youngsters, because they might have thought of something I hadn't. And
Yeah.
that's Roland Christo, who's been doing this for 70 years
And it's not even it's sometimes
or
just
more.
people who are working with different species. I may think of something because I'm working with galliforms that, or a group that you might not if you've only worked with citizens, but it can work across both settings. And I think it's that
Mhm.
whole conversation and talking to people as they're learning, because like Roland said, they may have thought of something that I didn't. And so
Yeah,
you've gotta
fresh
you gotta
eyes.
kinda be open.
Fresh eyes
Yeah.
are valuable.
So, all right. Heat and sun, creating the best
Yeah,
environment. What are we looking to do in that situation?
sure. So, I use, just what I've been building here where we live now. It's not my ideal. I have plans to do something much better and bigger, and all those things. But you do what you can with what you have at the time, right? So what
Mhm,
I've been doing is building just traditional, using dimensional lumber and using the the 5 rib metal roofing. It works really well. Something kind of similar to that. That's my barn there, my heated barn. So I keep birds that are really sensitive to cold that I can't necessarily keep outside year round. They go in there. That barn is now completely sheetrocked and all closed in and insulated and everything else. And just a small little heater in there in the wintertime will keep that whole thing warm. Um, so for heat, I think a couple of the critical things to keep birds outside in extreme heat would be making sure that the roof of the top of their cage is not right up against the metal roofing, if that's what you're using, metal or any roofing really. um
mhm,
because they're going to naturally stay up at the top of the cage even on a hot day, and that's just kind of oven baking down on them. So
mhm,
having a gap there of even just a couple of feet and having free airflow with one of those fans or something to get the air moving, that'll cool it down enough where they're going to be okay. Birds, obviously, we know how they handle heat, right? They open their mouth and they're panting. That's they can't sweat, so that's the way they're gonna to
mhm,
cool themselves through their lungs. Um, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just because you see a bird panting doesn't mean it's in distress. It it's perfectly fine. That's how they work. I have my Blythe's hornbill outside that we look out the back window of our kitchen and see him all day long. And every day when it's above 85 degrees, he's out there with his beak wide open, breathing through his mouth because
mhm,
that's how he's keeping himself cool. And it's okay. He's not in any distress whatsoever. Um, but the roof and the distance from the roof to the where the birds' heads are needs to have some space there, a couple feet at least, so it's not just baking right down into their heads. Um,
mhm,
Airflow is super important. So if you don't have airflow, if you're real stagnant where you are for whatever reason, or super humid like Florida or other places like that where it just gets so hot, um, air movement of air is going to make a big difference. And then of course
yeah,
misters. and sprinklers. I don't use misters because we are on a well and we have very high mineral content in our water. So
Mhm.
it just plugs up all those
Yeah.
misters almost immediately. We can't even use them. So I use rainbirds. And there was a picture earlier that Nick showed where I just put them over the top and just set them up to spray over, and I have them on timers, and they come on in the afternoon and just soak everything down, and cool the metal roofs down, increases the overall ambient humidity. Birds like it; they like the noise of it, hitting on the metal roof. It works really well.
Nice. And so you said they're on a timer? You have them on a timer,
Yeah.
your
Yeah, one of
sprinkler?
those
Yeah.
little battery operated timers. They just come on
Mhm.
15 minutes at a time or whatever you need to do. And yeah, it works
And
well.
again, those are all things you can pick up at Home Depot or Lowe's. I mean,
Exactly.
it's not hard to do. Um,
Yep.
so when do you is there so you said like at the farm in Happy Valley was they were
Mhm.
out 365 days a year.
Yep.
Um, is there a situation where you would pull birds because of heat?
Uh, Heat, no, I would just get the sprinklers going. I've never had a
Okay.
situation, again, up to 120 degrees where we had to do anything different than just keep the area cooled down with moisture. Um,
Okay.
that may not, and that's just my experience. I've never lived in a
Mhm.
super humid place like Louisiana or Mississippi or Florida, or whatever. I've been there, Florida, and I can barely take it myself because the humidity is so rough. So that may be a different environment, and we would have to ask someone that's down there and
Well,
successful,
I
because I
know
don't know
Carrie
how they handle that.
I know Carrie Ellen was on. I don't know if she's still on. Um, but she may if she is, maybe Carrie, if you could chime in if there's a point where or Sarah, you've been in humid, warm situation, climates. Is there a point, Sarah, where you would pull oh wait, Carrie's here too, or Sarah or Carrie. Carrie says with the high humidity we don't mist. It just grows mold in hours. Shade is best and sprinkle on the cage top when needed. Yep. So I mean that makes
Yep,
sense.
yep,
Um,
it sure does.
you know, um, so, all right. So that's we've kind of talked about heat, and all of these things are applicable to people with pet birds, with outdoor aviaries. All of this can be applied for them as well. Um, Creating the best environment when it's cold. What are we
Okay,
looking at in that situation, John?
yeah. So for the cold, similar to the heat, as far as you got to know what the sun pattern is, right? Where the sun's going across, so you know that the bird has shade available to them at any time throughout the day, right?
Hmm.
Um, with cold, similar situation. You got to know where the cold's coming from, right? It's coming from the north usually, and where's your prevailing wind coming from? It's the western, eastern, maybe southern even. So you got to know your particular spot there, and um, where the cold and where the wind is coming from. The wind is the killer. Still cold, almost any bird can take still cold down to very, very, very low temperatures. In Northern California, I had budgies, diamond doves, lovebirds, plum-headed parakeets. There you go. Very good, Nick. I had all those guys, okay, little tiny guys, outside at 5 degrees at night. 5 degrees. And they all survived just fine. No problem at all. Surrounded by snow, but they have a roof. They have at least three sides covered, so that if there was a wind of some kind, it wouldn't there wouldn't be a wind chill factor, because the wind chill is what gets them. So the cold, if it was 5 degrees all day and all night, they're going to start to struggle at the end of that following day. There's
Hmm.
yeah, I took that picture here in Idaho. That's what they call horse frost. I don't know why I call it that,
Yeah.
but that's cold, because that's just literally fog freezing on everything.
Yeah.
uh, so we've been here in Idaho. We've been here for 8 years, and our first winter was like a once in 100-year winter here in Idaho. So all the locals around here were terribly complaining about the winter that we had. We had 3 feet of snow on the ground, and it was brutal cold the entire winter. So one night, this is at our other house, the first one we moved into here, it got down to 27 below zero one night. And in that weather, I had outside red jungle fowl, um, all my chickens and all the poultry, that kind of stuff. Red jungle fowl, um, peafowl, I believe, pheasants, all those birds, and all my dogs, all outside, no heat, no nothing. They had protection, but no heat, and did just fine. Did just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you get into citizens, the main thing you got to worry about in bitter cold weather like that is their toes, because if their toes are exposed at night and they can't, if their perch is too small of a diameter for cold weather, then they're going to be perched on it. Their toes are going to be underneath, exposed on the perch, and that's where they're going to freeze.
Okay.
If they've got a wide perch, flat 2x4, let's say, for most species of parrots, that would be just fine, or a 4x4 or something like that. They're going to be perching flat and sitting on their toes, and then they'll keep them warm and everything's going to be fine. My biggest and worst lesson on this very thing was when I was about 15 or so, I think. One of the pictures that Nick showed earlier, I'm holding a blue and gold macaw in one hand and an African gray in the other. The blue and gold was my very first macaw I ever had. His name was Sailor, and he was my great pet. I took him everywhere with me. He was wonderful, but he lived outside with all my other birds. And we had a really cold spell one February there in where we lived in Northern California, and I didn't think about the perch diameter situation. So I had all these conures outside, a huge building full of conures. They all had their nest boxes, so they all go sleep in the nest boxes. They were fine in this. We got down below zero. Not a single one had a problem. My blue and gold froze his toes, and I didn't even know it. And the next day, when things started to thaw out a little bit, so did his toes. And then that's when the pain comes in. So then he chewed his toes off without me knowing that there was a problem at all, and he bled to death. So that almost killed my aviculture career right there. I was so distraught losing this spectacular bird that was so special to me. That really, really got to me. But it was a very hard lesson, and for that, I owe Sailor, the blue and gold macaw, for the rest of my life to make sure that doesn't happen again to any other birds.
I think it's such good advice, and it's just common sense. And when, a lot of what you're talking about, John, is just common sense. It's thinking things all the way through and thinking, and, people are saying on what a horrible lesson, and it's true. And unfortunately, that things like that do happen, not just in aviculture. They happen in rescues. It happens in, with companion parrot owners. But I think, people are understanding, and I think those are the kind of lessons that we need to learn from, that we need to take and move forward and get that information out there. So
Right, right.
yeah, that
Something that I talk
is.
about with some of my friends. In fact, Sarah and I were just talking about this the other day. But I've had this conversation with others as well. Is that I I can't quit aviculture because I feel I owe any of the birds that died on me. I feel I owe them to continue and try to get better.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, I we had discussed, John, we were gonna kind of close with what's the most important takeaway from this discussion, and I think that's it. I think you just nailed it. And I really appreciate, your sharing all this information, and it was so much. There's so much more we could talk about, but we're at an hour. And I definitely will have you back again if you'll be a guest, and we can talk more about stuff,
Anytime,
because I really
anytime.
excellent. And I really think, there's a lot of good information that people from whatever walk of bird life they come from, I think that this is, all this information has been really good. Carrie says, when we share that lesson, others learn not to repeat it.
Please.
Learn not to let
Yeah,
it
please
repeat.
don't make my
Yeah,
mistakes. I've made them all.
yeah.
Yeah,
And, Debbie says here, sometimes we miss that one detail. So
yep.
sad, but grateful you kept going. So yeah, it's a lot. Um, but I want to thank you again. And John's going to be a speaker at AFA. If anybody's wants to see John in person, because I think there's more to John Del Rio than we've seen tonight. And so the AFA conference is going to be in Costa Mesa, California, September 4th through the 7th. Here's a list of speakers. A lot of great speakers. Steve, we've got behaviorists, veterinarians, geneticists, behaviorists, conservationists. I can't read that fast, Nick. Um, Adrian, who's on our Flock Talk every week. Jack, Chan is bringing some of his birds, and of course, Jamie Whitaker. So if you're going to be in Costa Mesa, you should register and go. If not, if you can't make it to Costa Mesa, like those of us who are way out here on the East Coast and have way too much work to do right now, you can join them online, afabirds.tv. And there is a small registration fee for that, but worth it for all the information. So I want to thank you guys. I am not going to be able to be at AFA. Michelle just asked. I wish I could, but somebody's got to make the toys. So Janice will be there. But if you guys have somebody you want to hear from, somebody you want to um, get more information from, let me know and I'll see if I can make it happen. And now we know John, so we're going to use John for his contacts too. Um,
Anytime.
next Next week's guest is Eric Ducharme. Eric is the Mer Tailor. And if you guys don't know what that is, you should. We were lucky enough to meet Eric on our Rockstar tour, and Eric has agreed to come on and talk to us about his world as a Mer Tailor and his interactions with some really cool macaws. So we will see you guys next week. Thank you again, John. And we will see you guys next Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.